The first one is easily avoided, however the second one, what you're going to have to do is climb down the ladder to avoid his projectile, then climb back up quickly and deliver your shots. Here is the third version of him, which this one thankfully is first easy because he stands still, throwing his projectile, and where it actually explodes over you, sending out a spread shot. Thankfully, if you stand directly underneath of it, it won't be able to hit you at all. Be careful moving through this room to try to avoid as many of the spears as possible, though it's really tricky not to get hit, usually at least once or twice. Thankfully though, we got an extra little bit of health as we reach the bottom of this area. Slide underneath so that you can avoid the enemy on the top there. This area can be very tricky and you have to be quick and careful throughout it. As you can see, there's these big robots that move across the top of the screen and they drop a bomb down, causing the bottom part of the screen to be filled up with fire. If you get hit by this fire at any point, you will instantly lose a life just like falling into a pit or spikes. So you have to be very careful and very quick to get to higher platforms once the thing has been dropped so that you can avoid dying. Even if it means taking damage from other enemies, you just want to make sure that you're out of the fire in quick enough time so you don't lose that life. Shoot this moving dragon just a few times, then move into the door to get to Burner Man's actual lair for the boss battle. You can see Burner Man's actual lair is a little bit large. He quickly dodges back and forth to the left and right, and you're going to have to jump over him to avoid him. However, he flies up into the air and drops down, leaving a little bit of a wave of fire into the actual ground. This is his easy move to dodge, along with actually being able to jump over him. However, this move is his worst because it lays out a fire stream that actually absorbs your shot so you can't damage him unless you're able to get behind him and do a shot to him, as well as he moves closer and closer, jumping a total of 3 times before stopping. It's not too bad if you can get him in the middle of the area like I have him and able to either duck underneath of him or avoid him far enough back to the left or right of him. However, if you're near any of the pits, you may end up getting hit by the fire or falling into the pit and losing a life on the spikes. If you want to make the battle a lot easier, you can use the ice wall move that we got early in the game, and that will definitely help you out as that's his weakness. Next up, we have the water-themed level, a Pirate Man stage. In this area, we can see a large ocean-like area, and we have a lot of these floating spike balls that are going to get in your way. It just makes your pattern a little bit more limited as you're moving through the water as you're trying to do your best to avoid them as well as the squid-like enemies. Take the bottom path and go into the door on the right, defeating a couple enemies before going up the ladder. Be careful when moving down this ladder to avoid the octopus enemies moving back and forth. Do a large slide underneath the large whale enemy to completely avoid it without having to actually fight it. Next area, you have another larger ocean part area, and you're going to have to be careful while moving along, avoiding the spike balls that are floating, as well as being careful not to fall too low to the ground and landing in one of the spike pits. After a relatively short level, it's now time for the boss battle against Pirate Man. As our battle begins with Pirate Man, he immediately jumps inside of his bubble and starts bouncing around the level. For the most part, this pattern is relatively easy to dodge, however you will start to see the water start to decrease, and he'll continue to do his bubble move. When he does this portion, where he's moving back and forth on the left and right walls, Doing quick slides underneath of him will allow you to avoid taking damage. His bombs that he shoots out, he'll shoot out one and then another one right afterwards, and it will explode relatively near to you. So you have to be careful to try to get away from it just enough so that you can avoid the one and then be able to avoid the second one as well, either jumping or making sure it's far enough away from the wall. Thankfully though, these are the only two things you really have to worry about, and as long as you can actually slide underneath and avoid his giant bubble, you should have no problem delivering your shots to him. Next up is my favorite robot master of the game, Magic Man. Magic Man's level, as you'll see, is very much modeled after Clown Man's stage from Mega Man 8, which also happened to be my favorite from that game. In the level, we jump up to this portion and we have to wait a little bit for a train to come out, in which case we jump on the train in order to get over the large gaps in the tracks. You have to be careful when moving on the trains and waiting for the right opportunities so the enemies don't end up knocking you off, which will cause you to fall into the pits, as well as when you have to jump up to platforms, you don't accidentally try to make it too far, or else you could end up missing the train and end up falling into the pit as well. So you may have to wait a little bit for one of the trains to finally show up, but it's well worth it so you don't end up losing a life at this part. Here we have to jump up and make sure you do to avoid those spikes. Even if you end up missing the train on the other end, just wait a little bit for the next one to come by. In this area we have these large wheel enemies that you can instantly destroy with one of the ice walls if you want to, as you can see. However, you're going to need it in order to destroy the platforms around it so that you can end up getting down to the door in the lower right corner. As we continue, I'll show off a couple of the moves that we've gotten so far. First off being the copy ability that you can see makes a clone of yourself, which continues to launch out projectiles for as long as it's on screen and can be very useful against certain enemies. The flame we got from Burning Man works relatively well, and it's pretty much a flame that we've seen before in past Mega Man games, just giving us a nice steady stream of fire to defeat enemies. Using the flame ability though, as you can see, helped me out to defeat a lot of these little small guys as they're moving across the floor. From Pirate Man, we got those mines that shoot out, and you actually can control them. So you have full control over the mines when you launch them out, so you can get them to land where you want. If you're really good with them, you can get them into some pretty tricky places. In this area, we see the guys in the background move towards the bell and hit it. Every time they hit the bell, you can see that the platforms in the level switch around, and you have to be careful so you don't end up jumping on one of the platforms and land in any of the spike areas. The giant drill weapon, as you can see, launches out as a very large drill, but then every time you press the fire button again while it's out, it breaks apart and then breaks apart again into what ends up being a very small drill, so you can break it apart 3 times total. Over here, we enter the door and we have our battle against Magic Man. If you defeated Tengu Man before fighting Magic Man, you can use his weapon in order to do extra damage to him. Magic Man shoots out a ball that contains two little robot birds, which we've seen from past Mega Man games, in which case you'll have to defeat them as they move along, or just try to do your best to avoid them as they circle around. His main projectile, though, you'll have to jump over, because if you deliver a shot to it, it will actually drop one of those little robots with the top hats out of it. His other attack is that he throws out his magic card, that if it hits you, it ends up taking a large amount of health from you, and then ends up giving it to him. That's the weapon we end up actually getting once we defeat him.